Section 4.6, solving quadratic equations by factoring. So in the last two lessons, we learned about factoring using the X method, factoring using differences of squares, factoring by grouping, factoring by common factors. We're going to take all that stuff and kind of put it together into one lesson, and we're going to use it to solve. Okay? Now, the last two sections we never solved. All we did was we factored. Okay? This time you're going to notice the equations are all going to be set equal to 0, or you're going to have to set them equal to 0. And then from there, you're going to have to factor. Okay, so we're going to have to kind of go through that. But before I get into showing you examples, there's one thing that you guys have to know, and it's called the zero product property. Now, you've probably seen this before, okay? I'm counting on the fact that you've probably seen this before. But the zero product property basically says this. If A times B is equal to 0, then A equals to 0 or B equals to 0. Or both. But in math, or is inclusive, so it can be one, the other, or both. Okay? But this is called the zero product property, and it basically says if two things are multiplied together, it could actually be two or more things, but they're multiplied together, and they're equal to 0, that means that either one of them is 0 or the other one is 0, because when you multiply 0 times anything, it comes out to 0, right? So if A is 5 and B is 0, my answer is 0, right? So it doesn't matter. So just to kind of give you guys a real quick look into it. So if this was 0 times 2, well, that's 0, right? 0 times x, that's still 0, right? Because one of them is 0, okay? So it can even be like x minus 2 times 0. That's still 0. Right? This is just basically showing you that if you have two things multiplied together and they equal to 0, one of them should be 0. Okay? Now we're going to use this to kind of go over how to solve things. Okay? Now they're going to start you guys off really easy at first. All right? They're not going to force you to factor. The first 6 problems are going to be just straight out given to you already, set up for you to start. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So, example number 1. And we're just going to put a solve each equation by factoring. The only nice thing is we're not going to have to factor, okay? These are already going to be pre-factored for you. Don't forget that part that I have up there, guys. If two things are multiplied together and they're equal to 0, that means that one of them is equal to 0 or the other one is equal to 0. Okay, now why is that going to be important? You're going to see the way these things are written out right here. So this is already factored, right? You can tell this is what it looks like when you factor a trinomial using the X method. They just want me to solve, okay? So according to the zero product property, either x minus 2 is 0 or x plus 1 is 0, because both of them multiplied together equal to 0. So one of them or both have to be 0. So all you have to do is write the following. X minus 2 is 0, x plus 1 is 0, and solve. Solve both problems. So on the right side, if I add 2, on the right side, the left side, if I add 2, I get x equal to 2. On the right side, if I subtract 1, I get x equals to negative 1. So my two solutions are negative 1 and 2. Now I know these are kind of easy. I do want to show you a little variety, though. I don't just want to show you one and say, like, see, easy, two things multiplied equals 0. Just do that, right? Let's move on. Like, no, let me show you just a couple different ways you might see it. That way, it doesn't surprise you. Now, are we okay with this one? Just really quick, you multiplied x minus 2 times x plus 1, it's equal to 0. That means that it's either x minus 2 equal to 0 or x plus 1 equal to 0. You solve both of them, you get your answer. Okay? So once you get your answer, just put it in a set notation. I know some people just prefer they'll circle and circle, and that's okay. That's just not what we normally do in math when you have more than one solution, okay? Now, you might see it something like this. Let's say v times v plus 5 equals to 0. So this kind of looks like what happens when it has something in common, right? A common factor was taken out. But notice how it's still multiplication of two things, v and v plus 5, right? V times v plus 5. It's multiplication of two things. So according to the definition of the zero product property, it says get one of those things that's multiplying, the v, set it equal to 0, and get the v plus 5 and set that equal to 0 as well. Well, notice the v equal to 0, there's not much I can do with that. That's done, okay? The v plus 5, I can subtract 5 on both sides, and I get v equal to negative 5. So I got two solutions, negative 5 and 0. So let me write it down. V is equal to negative 5 and 0. Now I'm going to give you one more variation, and then we're going to move on to actually having to factor, okay? So are we okay with this one? Pretty easy, right? Nothing too hard. The whole front page, I think the whole front page, yeah. The whole front page, all 6 problems are already set up for you. All you got to do is know how to deal with them, okay? So I don't think they're going to be like super hard to do, but there's going to be one more that might look something like this. Let's say, what does the power of 2 mean on it? There's 2 of the same thing multiplied together, right? So like v times v becomes v squared because it's 2 of them multiplied together. So you can do this 2 ways, but since we haven't really dove into square roots, we're going to kind of avoid that part. I'm going to rewrite it in a split up form. Okay? I'm going to rewrite it split up. And now I notice 2 things are being multiplied together and it equals to 0. So according to the zero product property, either the first one or the second one of those factors is equal to 0. So you're going to basically write them out. 2x plus 3 equals 0, or 2x plus 3 equal to 0. Now you might be thinking, well, do I have to solve both of them? They're the same thing. No, you don't. You just solve one of them, okay? Because whatever the one on the left gives you, it's going to be the same as the one on the right. They're identical, right? So just solve for one of them. This one doesn't have to be done if you don't want to, okay? Because they're identical, so you don't need to. So we'll subtract 3 on both sides first. So I get 2x equal to negative 3. And then once you divide by 2, you'll get your answer. Okay, so divide both sides by 2. X is equal to negative 3 halves. And there's only one solution here. X equals to negative 3 halves. So I mean, hopefully you guys are looking at this and you're like, yeah, that's kind of easy. That's not that hard to do. That they're going to give me everything already written out for me. All I got to do is just write them out and solve them, and I'm done. Okay? So hopefully that's fine. Now, in the back, they're going to give you problems that aren't factored. Okay, so you're going to have to go through and factor them. So we're going to do a couple of problems like this just to kind of show you what's going on, and maybe we can go through the factoring flow chart and things like that. Okay, so this is going to be example number 2. Right now I'm going to move it up. Solve by factoring Okay, so we're going to solve by factor. And we'll start off, these are, for the most part, these are going to be homework problems. I'll tell you which ones are not. So like this first one is a homework problem. All the other ones that I did were not. The ones I did in the other examples. Because, I mean, they're easy enough. You don't need me to do those. These are a little more challenging. So, you know, not that they're super hard to do, but you know, I'll take a couple off your plate. All right, so if you're doing this using the factoring flowchart, okay, using this flowchart right here, the very first question you're supposed to ask yourself is what? It's on the top left. Does it have something in common, right? Do those have anything in common? R squared, 4r, and 5? No, besides a 1, but we never factor the 1. So no, it doesn't. So go down. Does it have 4 terms? Well, don't include the equal 0. Just look at the 3 terms on this side. So does it have 4 terms? No. Does it have 3 terms? Yes. So you're going to try doing the X method for this, or box method, okay? So I'm going to try using the X method. Now remember, I like writing my ABCs. So A is 1, B is 4, C is -5. You don't have to do this. I just prefer it so that I know what I'm doing here. Here's my X. So on the very top, A times C, 1 times -5 is -5. On the bottom goes B, that's 4. Okay? Now I got to think of two numbers that multiply to -5 that add up to +4. What are those? 5 and -1. So let me go ahead and put +5, -1. Do I need to divide by anything? Because why don't I have to? A is 1, right? So if A is 1, there you go. So these are my answers. So let me write down my factors. But notice I'm going to put equals 0 at the end because that's the way the problem is set up, right? Something's equal to 0. So my factors are R on both fronts plus 5 minus 1 on the other one. Now I have to solve each one of those, okay? Now I have to solve each one of those. So I'm going to start with R plus 5 equals 0. And R minus 1 equals 0. On the left side, if I subtract 5 on both sides, what do I get? -5. Okay, on the right side, if I add 1 on both sides, what do I get? R equal 1, right? So R is equal to -5 or 1. I mean, you can tell this part right here that you can see on the screen right now, that's the same thing that we literally just did in example 1. The only thing that I had to do was the top part, the factoring part, okay? Once I factored it though, it was as easy as the first 3 examples I gave you. Just basically separate them, set them equal to 0, and solve. Are we okay with that one? So factoring, for these, since we are solving, we have to make sure that they're equal to 0. So the question, in case you guys didn't hear it, was, is it always going to be equal to 0? Ideally, yes, but I'm going to give you guys an example where it's not, and we're going to have to make it equal to 0. Okay, but you always got to make sure it says equals 0 before you start solving. Okay? So let me give you another one. We'll do 4b squared minus 25 equal to 0. All right, so looking at your factoring flow chart, very first question is, does it have anything in common? Do they? No. Is it 4 terms? No, it's only 2, right? So is it 3 terms? No, because I just said it's only 2. So you go to the binomial. Is it a binomial? 2 terms? Yes. Is it a difference of 2 squares? Well, can I write it as something squared minus something squared? Yeah, I could, right? What do I put inside the first parenthesis? 2 what? 2b, right? 2b squared minus what do I put in the other parenthesis? A 5. All right. So based on what we did in the last section, you automatically just write 2b minus 5, 2b plus 5 equal to 0. So there you go. You just factored it. But now you got to solve it. Okay? So like I said, not yesterday's lessons, but Friday's lesson was all about just factoring and being done. Today's lesson, they're just saying, okay, now let's show you how you're supposed to use these factors. Why do we do this? Okay? So we set it equal to 0, and we'll solve. So 2b minus 5 equals 0. 2b plus 5 equal to 0. Are these both the same? No, they're a little different, right? One is a minus, one is a plus. Okay? So let me go ahead and solve each one. I'm going to start with the left side. Let's add 5 to both sides. And I get 2b is equal to 5. And then I'll divide by 2. So b is 5 halves. There's my first answer. Now I need the next answer. Okay? So I'm going to go to the right side. I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides. Remember, guys, if you don't have to show the steps, feel free not to. If you can do it all in your head, more power to you, right? So don't feel like you have to write everything I do. Unless you need it, then do it, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So we subtracted 5. We got 2b equal to negative 5. We'll divide everything by 2. And I got b equal to negative 5 halves. So your answer is a negative 5 halves and a 5 halves. Now, sometimes people will ask me, can I just write plus or minus 5 halves? You know, like the little plus minus symbol and then 5 halves. Yes, you can. Just sometimes some state tests will list both answers. Sometimes they'll list the plus or minus. So it just kind of depends. Okay? So there's your solution for this. So notice the first one that we did was a trinomial that was set equal to 0. The second one that we did was a difference of two squares that was already equal to 0. So what I'm going to do next is a problem where it's not set equal to 0 for you guys. And then we're done. Okay? Because I don't have to reteach you guys how to factor. Like, that's already been done on when was that? Thursday and Friday, right? We already did that Thursday and Friday. So we've already gone through that. Today's last lesson is just how to get both those lessons and solve. Okay? So let's do one more of these and then we're done. This is part C. And it's going to be, this is a homework problem. By the way, the one we just did was not a homework problem, but there's two of them that are very similar to it. So there you go. What's the problem with this one? Like, there's what? So there's variables on both sides. None of the other ones had that, right? What were the other ones equal to? 0. This one's not. So I have to force it to be 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this and throw it to the other side. Okay, I have to move it. Okay, so I don't know how you like to do that just in your head, but I'm going to actually show the step here. We're going to subtract 13n on both sides. It has to say equal to 0. Okay, so this is 5n squared minus 13n plus 8. Notice I put it in the right order because I'm going to have to factor. So I want to have my n squared first, my n second, my number at the very end. And now we're going to factor this thing. But before we just start factoring, go through your process. Do they have anything in common? The left side? No, right? They have a 1, but 5, 13, and 8 don't have anything in common. They don't all have n's. Is it 4 terms? No. Is it 3 terms? Yes. So then we're going to do the X method or box method, whatever you prefer. So I'm going to write down my ABCs here. A is 5. B is negative 13. C is 8. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and do my X method at this point. So here we go. So on the top, 5 times 8, that's 40. On the bottom goes negative 13. I need two numbers that multiply to 40 that add up to negative 13. -5, -8. Sounds good. Do I have to do anything else or am I done? I got to divide, right? I got to divide by 5 because my a term is a 5, right? That's the hardest step for a lot of people to remember is that division step, right? They kind of ignore it sometimes. So we get so happy that we found two factors that work. We don't even think about, do I have to divide? So on the left side, this becomes a -1. On the right side, I cannot simplify that, so I'm going to have a fraction, which means I got to go bottoms up, right? I'm going to have to move my denominator to the top. So here are my factors. Set it equal to 0. So I get n minus 1, n minus 8/5. But move that 8/5 over in front of the n. So n minus 1, 5n minus 8 equals to 0. And at this point, you are going to be able to solve for your two solutions. Okay? So let's go ahead and continue solving here. I get n minus 1 equals 0. 5n minus 8 equals 0. Okay? I have been asked before, Mr. V, like, do I have to rewrite it from here to here if I'm going to have to solve? Because eventually I'm going to end up with an 8/5. Like, do I have to? Mathematically speaking, you should clean it up properly. But honestly, if you start solving from that step right there, you're going to be okay. It might actually save you a little bit of time. All right? So, just so you know. But if you were just factoring it, then leaving it like this would be considered incorrect. Okay? If you're solving, you can solve from there. So, all right, for the left side, if I add 1 on both sides, I just get 1. N equals to 1. On the right side, let me add 8 on both sides. And that's going to give me 5n equals to 8. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 5. So n is 8/5. So my two solutions, 1 and an 8/5. And this is what your homework's going to look like.